and they said that their blood work results were acceptable or their organ imaging was acceptable for another season of competitions, it's probably a liability disaster waiting to happen. Vigorous Steve here. So I still see a lot of discussion going around about how we can prevent these open bodybuilders from dying. I've heard talks about mandatory drug testing on the day of the bodybuilding competition, which, take it from me, after coaching many bodybuilders towards drug-tested shows, they're basically only drug-free on the day of the competition. Some of the practices that come along with that, beating the drug test when there is a drug test, are probably more deleterious to your health than just going into the competition on all of the performance-enhancing drugs that we can choose from. There's been talks about weight and height restrictions, similar to classic physique, but a little bit higher weight cap compared to that class. Still, similar to coaching bodybuilders towards drug-tested shows, when bodybuilders do weight classes, it's not unheard of cutting 10%, sometimes even 15% of their body weight, just to squeeze into a particular weight class. We see this at the World Championships level over and over again. Backstage, on the day of the weigh-in, bodybuilders are barely able to stand. You have to carry them to the scale because they're so severely dehydrated. They've been fasting for several days on end, which is good for conditioning, I'll say that. But some of the practices they do leading up to the weigh-in are very, very extreme. And more often than not, forces them to use all kinds of crazy protocols afterwards just to load back up to have a full and round appearance on stage. So I honestly don't think that's a solution to the problem as well. Whereas with classic physique, they only have maybe 1 or 2 days, I believe, leading into the competition, depending on which level of competition they have. Between the weigh-in and the day of the show, they might have 1 day to load up, maybe 2 days to load up. And for them, because they have less muscle mass, they don't need to reload, reglycogenate so extremely as to the same sense as open bodybuilders need to do. So I don't think that's a solution either. I don't think it's a solution to make health screening mandatory because, well, let's be freaking honest here. Bodybuilding is far from healthy. And even during the off season, when you take months off from competition or any kind of performance enhancing drug, your blood work markers might still be off. Now, if a doctor screens your blood work and says, well, your blood work parameters are acceptable for a competition, then they're good on that moment while you're off performance enhancing drugs. And then as soon as you ramp up all of the performance enhancing drugs into your little bit of an off season to restore all of the muscle mass that you lost by coming off cycle, and then all the PEDs involved for competition prep, your blood work parameters are going to be horrible. Trust me, I've seen the blood work over and over again. None of the blood work results of the IFBB pros, especially in the open glass, are anywhere close to acceptable. Plus, no doctor is going to write off on this because then it's their responsibility. And I don't think the federation is going to write off on this blood work results also. Because again, if somebody ends up hurt and they said that their blood work results were acceptable or their organ imaging was acceptable for another season of competitions, it's probably a liability disaster waiting to happen. So what can we all do to make open bodybuilding healthy again? It actually starts with the judging criteria. We need to go in a different direction. Now, I understand that Big Ramy is now the current Mr. Olympia. He's still able to pull some sort of a vacuum. But I think if we make the vacuum mandatory in open bodybuilding and we go towards a more aesthetic route, a little bit similar to classic physique, but a heavier body weight, right? A bigger frame, bigger amounts of muscles, and perhaps similar comparable conditioning. I think if we change the direction to a little bit more classic-like physique, so we can call it open bodybuilding with hints of classic, you're able to pull a vacuum, you're in conditioning, but there's no signs of synthol, there's no signs of gynecomastia, there's no sign of other kinds of site enhancements or pec tears, right? We're really going towards this aesthetic look, preventing open bodybuilders from doing all kinds of crazy shit in the off-season or during contest prep with high dosages of insulin or high dosages of growth hormone or other PEDs, which will ultimately be deleterious to your health. If the physique standard of open bodybuilding changes over the next 5 years or so, because we still need to remove all of the veteran competitors that still fall in that old class of mass monsters, right? They still need to be phased out, allowing for new competitors with a more cosmetically pleasing physique to work their way up towards that exclusive Olympia title. I'm talking about physiques like Rafael Brandao, for example, who recently won a show. or an in-shape Regan Grimes, which he'll still need to prove a little bit. He's never really been in crispy conditioning, but his aesthetics and flow and overall proportion is certainly there. Samson Dauda, for example, who I feel is already transitioning a little bit more into this mass monster category. Again, that's what they're all chasing. They're chasing Big Ramy after all. So that's what's required. But if you reward Samson Dauda now, he can actually stay as cosmetically pleasing as he is already. And then he doesn't need to chase size anymore. He's already big enough. He can set a new standard. So if he can somehow change the judging criteria of the IFBB Professional League and NPC Worldwide, the amateur ranks, if the judging criteria changes to a lot more aesthetically pleasing physique, certainly a deviation from the standard which is open bodybuilding nowadays, I think we can save a lot of lives, because bodybuilders, open bodybuilders, will no longer have to chase size at all costs. Because let's be 100% honest here, nobody can beat Big Ramy at his all-time best, and nobody could beat Ronnie at his all-time best. There's a very small amount of bodybuilders who can get there and walk away unscathed. And, well, let's be honest, Ronnie didn't walk away unscathed. His body is literally broken. And hopefully his health parameters are all intact, and his organ imaging shows that there was no long-term side effects of what he did to get those 8 Olympia titles. And if the IFBB Pro League is not willing to do that, you can actually offer a helping hand by only supporting the athletes who remain aesthetic, that don't chase size at all costs, that don't ruin their physique, whether that's from a health perspective or a cosmetically appealing perspective, right? They get a bubble gut, or they start to resort to synthol, or they do those funky delt injections where they have, pumpkin-sized deltoids, which doesn't really look too pleasing in my opinion. Only support the athletes who are actually trying to set a new standard and try to remain somewhat marketable. Only use their discount codes, their coaching services, only support them when they're using affiliate marketing or try to promote certain products. Now these athletes will make money. They will be able to take care of their health much better than the open guys who do chase size at all costs and ultimately end up getting unhealthy. They will not have the funds to take care of themselves. And as fucked up as it sounds, this is the only way us as a fan-driven sport, again, bodybuilding is a huge fan-driven sport. All of the athletes rely on the fans to use their discount codes and whatever services they might offer through their Linktree or Instagram page. You, as the audience, the fans of this sport, only support the athletes which are actually trying to set a new standard and take care of themselves. And these guys that do size at all costs, you don't fill their pockets. And then they will simply phase out over time. Right? So this is the way you can actually make a small contribution to changing this sport for the better and prevent the new and improved generation of open bodybuilders to end up like the previous generation of open bodybuilders, which many seem to suffer from severe health complications that they're not willing to talk about because they think it's going to tarnish their legacy. And after they're done with competition, that's pretty much all they have left. A lot of things we can do as a community, and this is mostly on the shoulders of the coaches, we can reel back or reel in our athletes. There's a lot of guys that are willing or wanting to chase that pro card, but not everybody has the genetic makeup to get there. So if you have a client that clearly doesn't have the genetic makeup after coaching them for a year or two, you can't say to somebody just looking at a picture, say you have shit genetics, you will never be an open pro, because when you look at the before and after pictures of Nick Walker, well, that's night and day difference. And when you see his before pictures, when he did his first 2 shows, he literally looked like a stick. And look at him now. So give a guy at least 2 years to chase that pro card. And if he doesn't get the pro card within 2 or 3 years of starting his hardcore bodybuilding journey, it's probably best not to chase it at all, because you do need elite genetics to make it to the top. And it's going to be very, very difficult to get a pro card or at least win an open show, allowing you to go to the Mr. Olympia, to be competitive there. And let's be honest, most first-time athletes at the Mr. Olympia, they place out of the top 14 unless they're really, really freaking good, which is, again, a very rare commodity in our space. If you're not a freak within 2 or 3 years of doing your competitions, chasing that pro card, maybe it's not for you. And the coach needs to be transparent and honest with their athlete and say, listen, I don't think it's going to work out. Maybe you can be better on Instagram instead. There's 1,000 Instagram famous people in our bodybuilding and fitness space that make way more money than open bodybuilders do, simply by being athletes. They train, they share information, they share their blood work, they share their organ imaging, they're entertaining, they're fun to watch. All of these things are probably not possible when you're changing your pro cards, because again, the IFBB Pro League is kind of against you talking about performance-enhancing drugs or showing the deleterious effects that these drugs might have in your health or your organs. These things you need to keep in mind. And as a coach, we can just say, listen, you can do classic instead. If you don't have a classic physique body, maybe you go for your classic physique pro card and then hang it up, call it quits. And some guys will never be able to get the pro card simply because they don't have the physique that matches the standard of what the IFBB has set. Right? Classic physique is very aesthetic, and hopefully we can change open bodybuilding towards a more aesthetic physique as well over the next 5 years or so. As a coach, you just have to be honest with your athlete and say, listen, you can be in shape, you can look good. Maybe an Instagram career is better for you because it looks like the athlete doesn't have the genetic response to drugs, which is required if you want to compete in open bodybuilding. Maybe limit it to 1 gram of steroids, just an arbitrary number to give you guys an example. 1 gram of anabolic androgenic steroids during the off-season, perhaps with some growth hormone, insulin, IGF-1, other peptides on top to facilitate muscle growth. During the off-season, you should already end up being a freak, right? 250, 270, 300 pounds even, just on a simple protocol like that. That's what genetic response to drugs looks like. And then during a competition prep, maybe the dose just go as high as 2 grams, 2.5 grams a gear with obviously more growth hormone and perhaps insulin if the athlete can tolerate that during a competition prep. And there's 1,000 different protocols to run PEDs, but in those two scenarios, if there's no phenomenal response to these kinds of doses ranges, yeah, I don't know what to say. Are you going to push the gear to 6 grams a gear? That's 6,000 milligrams during the off season. I mean, where are you going to go from there? There are athletes who do that. They don't have a great genetic response to drugs, and they do push the dosages way too high to the point their organs might be failing, but they're not talking about it. You have to draw the line somewhere as a coach. You can't just put these athletes on more and more and more drugs because they want to chase that pro card. Not everybody is built for it. Maybe you just figure out how much of a result they can get from 1 gram a gear, maybe 1.5 grams a gear, and then see where they end up at. It's going to be survival of the fittest. The genetic elite will get a phenomenal response to these kinds of dosages. And people with an average response who shouldn't go for open bodybuilding will not even get there because they'll probably place out of the top 10 in an amateur show. Coaches can also do a lot better regarding organ imaging. Don't place it on the pro league. Don't place it on the doctor to write off like checkmarked, you're good to go for another competition season. This is up to the coach. I've always prided myself on only accepting athletes who would do blood work frequently. And when I say frequently, every 3 fucking months. You hear IFBB pros talk about doing blood work every 6 months. That's not enough. If you're an open bodybuilder, you should do blood work every month. It doesn't have to be a full panel, but at least check what is off on the previous results. This is how you keep track of everything that's going on in your body, plus the mandatory organ imaging, which should take place at least once a year. We're talking about ultrasounds on all of the organs, an echo on the heart, and of course an electrocardiogram, which you can do every 6 months if you want to, especially if you do frequent contest preps with a lot of stimulants, right, to get your body fat levels low. Maybe a CT scan every 2 or 3 years. Maybe an MRI with contrast every couple of years. All these things need to be in place, and the only way the athletes are actually going to do that is if the coach tells them so. So if the coach is not telling them, or the coach tells them, just go for a basic comprehensive metabolic panel. The fuck, man? That's not enough. That's not enough. A basic comprehensive panel once a year and you're good to go. Let's put you on 5 grams of gear. And there are coaches out there, and some coaches don't even interpret your blood work for you, or they interpret it wrong, and they say you're still good to go when your blood glucose levels are like 200 milligrams per deciliter due to growth hormone abuse. As an athlete, you choose a coach who understands blood work and all of these health parameters that need to be managed at the highest level of open bodybuilding or leading into the highest levels. And the coach just needs to force it down the athlete's throat. Go for blood work. I want to use more gear. Go for blood work first, you motherfucker. I feel a little bit pain in my chest. Stop what you're doing, go to the ER and get heart imaging done. There's so much more that these open bodybuilding coaches can do, especially the supposedly elite coaches that only coach elite level athletes in the open bodybuilding class. Ask them to explain how a CT angiogram works and ask them to tell their athletes to get a CT angiogram done and ask them to explain why it's important to do an occasional functional magnetic resonance imaging of your heart with gallium contrast. Ask them to explain how to interpret these results and what the difference is between a CT angiogram and an fMRI with contrast, right? A lot of these top-level coaches probably can't explain it because all they do is drug and food adjustments. But that isn't all that coaching is about. Coaching is also about keeping your athlete healthy in the near foreseeable future, during a contest prep, or a couple months off season. They need to be healthy then in the near foreseeable future, during their entire competitive career, they need to remain healthy. And then for the decades that follow that, you can't just sauce them to the gills, hoping that they end up at the Olympia stage so you as a coach can make a name for yourself and say, oh, I did this, I got this athlete to the Olympia stage, and then he dies a year or two later. It doesn't really look good on you, dude. So, right, in my opinion, the coaches can do a lot better. They really need to reel back their athletes. I understand that athletes have huge aspirations to be the best open bodybuilder they can possibly be and win the Mr. Olympia title. But for the large majority, it's not meant to be. And as a coach, hopefully the athlete listens to you. And if they don't listen to you, if they don't follow your advice regarding the health parameters that they need to check in the organ imaging and keeping the dosages somewhat sane, right? I understand there's always a risk to reward, especially at the end of a competition prep, but it shouldn't have to exceed of what is required. And hopefully as an experienced coach, you know exactly what's required and what isn't required regarding the pharmacology that's involved. So hopefully they listen to you. And if they don't listen to you, you drop them. You refund their money and you drop them and you're hands off, right? It's no longer your responsibility. You did your part. You tried to keep them healthy. The athlete is not willing to listen. They will go to the next guy who will double your dosages, and don't send them in for blood work if they end up dying under their watch. That's their problem, right? The coach and the immediate family that they leave behind. And then the last thing that needs to happen for this open bodybuilding class to change is for all the retired veteran competitors of the open bodybuilding class to come forward and be transparent of all of the negative health ramifications they got along the way. Just don't say it a little bit slightly on a podcast that you have kidney issues and continue to bump up the brightness over and over again because you clearly have signs of insulin resistance, which you can easily see around the face here where it starts to turn darker and darker and darker. Those are early signs of insulin resistance. Just be open about it, for fuck's sake. It pisses me off so much. I know what to look for because I've been in this sport for over 20 years and I see the blood work and I talk with some of the pros who had severe health issues due to their competitive career. I'm not going to talk about it because they contact me under confidence, but a lot of the IFBB pros that are now retired can be so much better in the information they put forward on the toll that this competitive career took on their body, regarding their connective tissue, regarding their organ health. There's a lot of things that veteran retired IFBB pros can do for transparency purposes for the next generation that hopefully is going to be new and improved and follow a different standards set by the IFBB Pro League, which I think is never going to happen, but we can always dream and fantasize, right? If these guys come forward and say, yes, I had kidney issues, my creatinine is 4 or 6, I'm undergoing dialysis, I had issues with my liver. I had to have a part of my liver removed because there was a cancerous hemangioma or whatever else present. A hemangioma is usually congenital and it doesn't turn cancerous, but there are cancerous growths in livers, especially with oral steroid abuse. And well, there's plenty of coaches out there who will put you on all of the orals at all pretty high dosages, so you don't have to do so many injections. Well, I'm sure you guys know what I mean by now, so let's leave it here. Let me know down below in the description section how you feel that the open bodybuilding class can change. Do we need to change the judging parameters? Do we need to hold the coaches accountable? Do we need to send everybody in for mandatory organ imaging before they're even allowed to compete? Honestly, I don't think open bodybuilding is ever going to change because bodybuilders will do what bodybuilders will do best, and that's chasing size at all costs until they get unhealthy and then they slim down and become a little bit disgruntled and reclusive. Thank you guys so much for watching. You can find everything that I'm associated with down below in the description section. It's right between the video and the comment section. So while you're on your way down to the comment section to leave me a response, check out the description section for all of the sponsors and affiliates that I'm associated with. If you're looking for something special that I discussed on many of my YouTube videos, head over to my site, check out my article section. I'm pretty sure there's a discount code for whatever that you're looking for, so you can save yourself some money in the process. Vigorous crew, you guys know what to do. A front double bicep for you guys. Not the most impressive front double bicep, but hey, it's a healthy front double bicep. And in the long run, health is wealth. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.